Hello, everybody.
Oops.
Good to see you. Connecting even this way is inspiring. And oh, this is Mary Taylor. And
This is why I do the introductions usually. So welcome and thank you, Richard. And this is Richard, by the way. And
so,
we've been doing these talks now for about a year and a half during the pandemic, almost 2 years, and we keep really trying to bring together some of the things that come to us through yoga practice and some of the questions that arise through practicing consistently over years and years of practice, and to bring those together with what's going on in the world. And as we were thinking a couple of weeks ago about doing this talk, what keeps coming up for us is the traumatic events that are going on in the world. They're front and center for all of us. And then last week, there was that horrendous shooting in Texas of school children. Just 10 days before that or something, there had been a horrendous shooting at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. And just before I signed on to do this evening, I turned on the computer and there was a flash. There'd been another shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So for those of us who are in the United States, this persistent and endless chain of gun violence is something that is eating away at our psyches, at our minds, at our souls, and the soul of the country. And we could do a whole session on that and gun violence and yoga specifically related to that.
the history of the gun violence, how it evolved
Yeah,
from
yeah.
long ago. But
And perhaps we will do that. But we've been so profoundly moved by these killings, couched in the violence that's going on elsewhere in the world, that we wanted to do a sort of more general talk tonight about how yoga impacts our ability to sense into violence and nonviolence, and how yoga and practices might impact our ability to cope as well as to take action. And with each individual type of violence that we run into, there might be different things that need to be done. But we'll talk about that as the evening progresses. But one thing that's been very interesting and has become a term now is the idea of cascading traumatic events, meaning that there have been one thing after another, after another, after another. When you look at the environmental violence that is going on in the world, which is not, directed at any one individual necessarily, but it is an act of violence.
against trees, against coral, against the
Animals.
oceans and animals.
And humans.
And humans.
Yeah. And then the wars, the war in Ukraine at the moment, and then also violence elsewhere in the world. And so what we're faced with is this idea that is paramount to yoga, which is the idea of ahimsa, or nonviolence, and looking at it in relationship to violence, and what these two things are, what they mean. And when you look at them in a sense, in the way we do look at things like the breath as a wave pattern, what becomes apparent is that they are a an interconnected complementary pattern, a wave pattern of nonviolence and violence. And within each one of us, we have the potential for both, for expressing both, for expressing violence, expressing anger, expressing what we think might be one of the main roots of violence, which is fear, that then gets sort of when we are filled with fear, it's almost as if you feel like a caged animal. Sometimes you've lost your freedom, you've lost your perspective on things. You don't really know what's true and what's not true, and you're completely cut off from the feeling of love that is the root of nonviolence, of ahimsa. So ahimsa has at its root this real embodied feeling of love and trust and truth and freedom.
Satisfaction. Yeah.
And at the same time, we, as individuals who practice, we have to really admit and look at the dynamic that these two things have of avidya or nonviolence and violence, and that within each of us they are there. And I am, ashamed in a sense to admit that after the last shooting in Texas last week, when the National Rifle Association was going to have this big convention, which they did do 3 days later, that the thought crossed my mind, the violent thought just was in my mind was, maybe someone will just go in and shoot up the NRA meeting, and maybe that will make a difference. Maybe they will see, how this kind of violence impacts us. And then I caught myself and I thought, well, that is the example of violence begetting violence rather than, nonviolence perpetuating more nonviolence. And so I put away my guns.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
Yeah, but it's this natural process.
Yeah, that's why the violence is so upsetting, because we have it, everyone has it in them, and they could just respond, and then there's no end to it.
Mm-hmm. And so in yoga, those of you who've studied yoga know about the yamas, which is where we talk about ahimsa or nonviolence.
Oh, right. Yeah. And so, the yamas are the first, the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, starts with yamas, which are basically just oaths or, things to help control or to stop things. And so there are 5 of them, as I recall, and ahimsa, him is to harm, and ahimsa is don't harm or don't hurt. And that's a good way of saying, like the same thing as metta, be kind or be loving, but this is like really addressing like the thing. And so you start with ahimsa, and then it progresses. So these are not really different things, but it's a little deeper, is satya, which is truth or reality. It's actually understanding things for what's really happening on a deeper level. So satya is to be honest, truthful, and that's really hard for people to do. It's more like everyone wants to present, their story, their face, their selfies from their, on all that, and that's part of what destroys ahimsa is that people are not honest, and because they're hiding or they're manipulating.
Destroys ahimsa, yeah.
Yeah, and then asteya is, I believe, the next one, and that means don't take things. It literally is often is don't steal, but it's also don't try to accumulate power, wealth, beyond what is necessary for functioning, and so you don't steal. And we do this not just physically from the marketplace. You steal an apple or something, but we are always like, I even steal ideas. I'll take something, then I'll quote myself later, and then brahmacharya is one that people are always uncomfortable with because it's always translated as celibacy, but actually it means to act as if other beings are Brahman, which is the beloved. And so then you're acting within Brahman, and that's brahmacharya. And so that doesn't preclude, a romantic relationship or anything, but it's always been translated just in the caste or the varnashram dharma system as now you got to be, celibate until we get you married. So be good. And I think there's a deeper meaning that was intended by Patanjali.
Although not using or abusing people sexually
seems to be
an important aspect of it, which might have...
Yeah, sexual abuse is huge. I mean, we unfortunately read about that every day, and often in relation to the same problems. And then aparigraha is, I think, the final one, and that means in every dimension, don't grab stuff. And so that would be, even in the subtle dimensions of mind and ego, or fame, fortune, power, or you just don't cling on to things that are essentially empty of anything to cling on to. So that's, again, a misperception, and that's a problem. And so all of these yamas, they are really what has to be done when one doesn't perceive things. And that's, as we have talked about earlier, avidya, or not understanding, not knowing correctly. And then when you are not perceiving, it just builds up. And so the solution is in the Yoga Sutra to practice, practicing insight into this. So to do away with avidya, oftentimes you, again, practice satya, or truth, and then all of the practices in the Ashtanga system eventually come to that point where you have to be able to concentrate your mind, even though you have learned the theory, well, it's all impermanent and it's all empty. But a huge part of the practice is to realize that your own mind is as violent as anybody else's, and that you have the potential of, and you often feel it, like when I hear about, some of these political things, or these autocrats or crazy people or just violent, mean people, there's part of me that just wants to go out and eliminate them. And then what I do is called hypocrisy, where I say, oh, I don't do that kind of thing. Let's just go eliminate them, and we'll convert everybody to the yoga religion, and everybody will be practicing ahimsa and will be nice. And they have to chant, of course, our mantras, not their mantras. And then people do this in every religion. They do it obviously in this country. The people present, oh, this is what Christianity is. This is Orthodox Christianity. This is the Baptists. These are all of these different interpretations. Or they even do that with secular humanism. They present atheism because obviously religion has caused all the problems in the world. Well, it's certainly helped. Then I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. But that's also a religion. It's a metaphysical assumption. And so that's what humans do, is we find that which gives us some kind of relief. And this is like the spark of yoga practice, and it happens in all cultures. And then we don't keep going, and we refuse to see inside of ourselves.
And with ahimsa, that happens when people, an example that we often give is, people say, well, I'm a vegetarian because I don't believe in harming, which is a very noble reason to be a vegetarian, that I don't want to kill other sentient beings. And then you find yourself at your grandmother's house, and she is not a vegetarian, and she has spent the whole day, or your grandfather's house, they've spent the
Your
whole day
100-year-old grandfather.
getting the foods that they love, that represent love to them, that represent interfacing and connectedness to them. And, and that is an opportunity to practice non-harming as much towards the person who is being generous, the person who is there really sincerely showing up and offering something of value and care and love. But then what can happen is, we have our idea about what nonviolence means, and then we become rigid and make that person feel uncomfortable. And, and that's, as we are learning to sort of incorporate these yamas into our lives, that's an obviously normal sort of sophomoric response to, oh, I practice ahimsa, therefore I'm going to be really mean to people who won't practice ahimsa, or those who give me a meal in terms of, being vegetarian. And there are many people who do that within the yoga world. And so this is one of the ways that the sort of discomfort of not really having absorbed what ahimsa actually means, that it is a bigger picture than simply, I never, ever do any harm to anything. It is that you have to look at the context. And there are many stories of, how ahimsa, as we take the vow to be nonviolent, how that has to be weighed within the context of our situation.
Well, it's like I take a vow of ahimsa, not harming, and then I'm, walking down the street with a newborn baby or something, and a bunch of mosquitoes jump on the baby, and there happens to be a plague going on, and I gently try to push each mosquito off. Or there's different types of lizards and snakes, in certain countries that might jump on a family member or something. And you have to swat it away very quickly, and sometimes in a way that will kill it.
Do some harm at the least, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be done with hatred or anger. And if it is, then there are practices to... But we're often placed in situations where the vow of ahimsa is going to make us hypocritical very quickly, and so this is a big topic, and I'm just recalling in the course of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna and Krishna. Which is actually a book that's teaching yoga in a very difficult way. They end up, Krishna pulls Arjuna's chariot up between two armies, and then all of a sudden Arjuna sees, well, these two armies are not actually, they're one big family. That's an extended family. And he sees that on both sides. And if this war goes on, it could be really tragic. But if he decides, or if they decide not to fight, then the psychopathic, narcissistic, evil brother, which reminds me of certain politicians, will take over, and then he's going to actually cause the death of many, many, many more people and cultures. And so what to do? And so...
And even in the Mahabharata, wasn't it that Krishna had vowed nonviolence? Yeah.
Yeah, well, at the beginning of, before Krishna had said, what I'll do is I'll be his charioteer. I'll be Arjuna, who's also his close pal or friend. I'll be his charioteer, but I promise that I won't take up weapons. And so this is a big vow. In fact, it's Vishnu, who's God, has just taken a vow of nonviolence. And it turns out that Arjuna's teacher, and one of the good teachers for half of the people in the two armies, Bhishma, is on the bad guy's side, the side of the Kurus. And so what happened is that finally Bhishma and Arjuna end up, fighting, but Arjuna is taking it a little bit light because this is his beloved teacher that he respects, and who happens to also be the best fighter at those times. And he's taking it easy, and then someone comes and points this out, and Bhishma, starts to defeat Arjuna, and it was very difficult because Arjuna could be killed, and so what Krishna does is he sees, oh, my beloved friend is about to die, and so he takes his wheel, which is his chakra, that he holds on his fingertip, it's the wheel of time. It's called the Kala chakra by some people. And he gets off the chariot and he goes up to Bhishma and is about to, do away with Bhishma. And so all of a sudden Arjuna wakes up, and Krishna had broken his vow.
But without that, Arjuna might not have
and
woken up. And so
he wouldn't have
that's
woken
the
up.
teaching there is,
And that would be a problem. And so even, the vow of ahimsa has to be modified according to what's actually going on. That's why the satya, or the truth, and the context. And so, and there are many examples all of us can think of where one has to actually, and in tales like the Mahabharata, you actually have to fight on occasion in order to protect others, or to protect the truth, or to save other people. And I'm sure there are many, I'm just reminded of soldiers, you can actually, now, are both sides in a conflict necessarily evil? Sometimes they are. Sometimes both sides are complete. But sometimes, one group is really trying to eliminate or even commit genocide against another group. And diplomacy is, of course, much better because it's always the ideas of some leader, or some kind of vain sociopath who's doing the whole thing. And if you can get to them, communicate or expose them, that could be good. But I was just thinking of in the Ukraine, in the last few days, there were like over 200 Russian soldiers abandoned the attack on this Ukrainian town because they saw it as completely unethical and totally against what the idea of being a soldier was.
And so, really, as we look at our own capacity for nonviolence and for violence, then we start seeing the imperative to not let avidya, or this idea of confusion of what is permanent with that which is not permanent, but also the confusion of separateness, that we are not interconnected, that we are someone separate from everything else. We have to be able to really remind ourselves of that root of suffering, which is avidya. And so we find ourselves in a situation, as a Ukrainian soldier or as a parent with a kid with mosquitoes all over them, and we have to be able to somehow track what is going on well enough so that we can make a decision that is seeing things in the bigger picture. And that's why being able to look at these things like violence and nonviolence really requires the ability to do some of the practices that we do in yoga, like that begin with focused attention, training ourselves to be able to focus the mind and focus the body so that we can and use the breath to stay grounded so that we can then ask ourselves, are we in alignment with what is relevant and most important to us? And and what will serve the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so
And
a big part of it really is the admission for all of us that we do have these two sides, that there is this wave pattern within each one of us, but also within our actions. And that small actions can have, or no actions can have impact, and big actions can also have profound impact. And so it is a real responsibility to take the freedom that goes along with the sense of love and truth and honesty, to take that freedom and use it, with integrity.
yeah, and in terms of what you should do, like in the Gita, Krishna never told Arjuna what to do. He said, find out, your swa dharma, your true dharma, like what is your true nature, and Arjuna kept asking him specifically, well, tell me exactly what to do. And this whole long book, 18 chapters, he doesn't tell him what to do, but he explained to him the situation, and then he kept telling Arjuna, at the beginning, you should stand up, like utthita, which is, and you think of yoga poses, and then do the yoga. It's basically, it was very clear. In fact, it was made, directly said, I want you to stand up and do the yoga and fight this enemy, which is ignorance. And that was what Arjuna had to do. And whether that involved shooting somebody on the battlefield with his bow and arrow or not, or, running away and becoming a, hacker or something. Whatever. He never told him, but he just kept pointing out, oh, this is the situation, this is dependent on that, and this is what the mind is doing, and he kept going deeper and deeper. And so how do we find out what's going to actually help?
And, as we practice, we get more sensitive to our bodies, to our emotions, to other people, to our situations, to the point sometimes that, we're overly sensitive. But the good thing about the practice is that it really wakes us up and wakes up our nervous system, wakes up our consciousness so that we see these interconnected patterns. And when we have thought about this idea of utthita, what Krishna says to Arjuna, stand up, it really speaks to the notion that within each of us, just like we have these different aspects of violence and nonviolence, we also have the capacity to track within our own physical daily experience the physical sensations, the embodied feeling of avidya, the embodied feeling of ahimsa, the embodied feeling of violence. Like, where in your body do you experience these things? And when in the Gita, when when Arjuna was just distraught, that was when he collapsed, and that's when Krishna says, stand up, stand up. And so that he exposes his central channel, he exposes his heart, and he is telling him, tap into those sensations.
Yeah, when you collapse in your chariot, with bad posture, closing your heart, you no longer feel, even though it's strong, the prana patterns in the body, sensation patterns, and your thoughts. The entire, every little detail of the thoughts are grounded in those sensation patterns and reproduced by them, or
And so just as an example, when I was thinking of, the NRA, the National Rifle Association meeting, and feeling so charged by that, what struck me after the kind of crazy thought that went through my mind was what it felt like in my body to even have that fantasy, and how terrible that felt, even though the idea of revenge or of this will teach them or something was sort of like my emotion or my logic behind it. The feeling in the core of my heart, which when it is when I'm feeling love, when I'm feeling tenderness, when I'm feeling spaciousness, is extraordinary and is creative and is blissful, is bordering on, maybe in a few lifetimes getting to a sense of understanding emptiness and the clear light. It is this real embodied sense of being able to breathe fully and express tenderness. And when I had that thought, those feelings of spaciousness had disappeared. And that was the alarm signal to me that, oh my goodness, this is doing no one any good.
But I have to admit I had similar thoughts.
Now you tell me.
And but then if you at a certain point regain your internal awareness, then you think, well, what would be the consequences? Would that work if I were to go to that NRA meeting and protest in my way? And then thinking probably would make things worse. It would actually create what certain politicians want, which is a war within the country, a civil war. And so, and we all do that. Like, I've noticed when I have, throughout the day, I occasionally get mad.
Every week you talk, every month you talk about this.
Besides mad at inanimate objects, which, the entire universe is inanimate according to Sankhya. But no, if I say certain things, certain words that are words of emotional expression that have become very popular, more than
like curse words.
curse words,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
You seldom do that
No.
out loud, at
Yeah.
least.
But, if at occasion, when you're doing something and it's, you use, and everyone has their special ones, but you feel the effect in the body of it. It's like a negative mantra, and it like really, and so, and then just to notice that you're doing that, and to notice the effect of it,
And the danger is that we don't continue to notice these patterns arising, that we don't notice when we have, anger or frustration or fear arising, and that we then become, or that we don't notice when we have stretched the truth and are not telling the 100% truth in a kind way. We become desensitized to acts of, sort of introductory acts of violence. And when you become desensitized, you then can up the level of violence that you are, that you are willing to tolerate. And that, really seems to be one of the things that's happening in the world today, is that because of this idea of the cascading traumatic events, we have been, we have really become numb, many of us. And because we have had so many things like this happen and may have not responded in ways because we haven't been able to, we have become numb to some of this. And then the level of input, the level of violence that it takes to make a statement has to be higher. And that seems to be part of what is happening in the world. I was talking to a friend yesterday, texting with a friend
about school children.
about schools, and this wonderful Haven, who's this wonderful senior about to graduate from high school right now in a couple weeks or a week, was just saying when that school shooting had happened in his school and they were talking about it, there wasn't the same level of alarm among the other school children participants, or seniors and juniors, and that's concerning. And that's partly due to, obviously, just lots of other things going on in people's minds, but also because we've just had so many traumas, so many violent things happen to us. I was thinking about, when do you get numb? You get numb physically, like if you have ever gone into the ocean. I used to live up near Boston. I thought it was going to be great to live near the ocean. And it's just, there are like 2 days in the year when if you walk into the ocean, you don't freeze. But, you would go into the ocean and within no time, literally 2 minutes, your whole body would be numb because you'd had to just kind of close off your nervous system so that you could survive. Or the opposite, if you're a frog and you find yourself in warm water that's slowly getting hotter and hotter, which is the violence that's happening, you don't really notice.
Right, you don't notice the hot water until you're cooked.
Until you're cooked. So we're at that precarious stage where hopefully the practices that we are doing for each of us as individuals will allow us to keep tracking these feelings that, in my perception in my body, and it could be different for yours, but the feelings of violence and nonviolence are very much centered in the core of the heart, in the prana and the apana, being able to freely join together rather than one dominating the other. So that's, at the end of this talk, we have a little bit of a thought on a possible exercise that we might suggest for you, but think about that. Think about what it feels like in your own body. when you experience these different things. And then, another thing that Richard and I had talked about is that the idea of violence and nonviolence are within our culture and in other cultures are sometimes tied into the male and the female archetypes. The male being the more,
The boss.
testosterone-driven
Yeah,
one
the fighter.
the fighter, and the female being, the soft, female energy that's brought to the situation. And just like ahimsa and violence, those are parts of each of us as well. It's not like only men are the male archetype. We each have that in us. But from a female perspective, I've been thinking a lot recently about the fact that it is time for those of us who do practice, who care so deeply about other people and about really helping to liberate the world from suffering. And the world is just suffering more and more and more in certain ways. And that consciously feeding into our lives and into our actions the archetype of the female energy, which is the more passive, peaceful energy, that is, it's time that kind of happen, that men and women start to really acknowledge the value of the female.
Of nourishing, of taking care, as if everyone were your child.
Yeah.
So, what was that you were reading about the women?
Oh. Well, I mean, there were several thoughts I had on that. One was that what's happened in the culture, and this really, when you look, because it's been such a male-dominated world since the world began, in terms of politics and power.
Most cultures.
In many cultures, even matriarchal cultures, the male-dominating power is often quite strong. But what I started noticing is in movies and things like that, maybe around the time of the movie Kill Bill, around the time of the movie The Matrix, where, what was her name? The female character there, which I've drawn a blank on her name, she was, strong and doing all these sort of violent things. And since the beginning of that shift in media, there have been more and more and more sort of women in the media, in movies and things, being violent, and rather than bringing in the female strength. So the idea of being a soft, strong person is not one that is sort of perpetuated. And that since those movies, then what has happened is more and more women, you're reading stories about them doing some of the violent acts, which is just outrageous. So my feeling is it's time that the female energy really be sort of highlighted in some of what we do. And part of what brought this to my mind was I was teaching another course on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, well, what is Mother's Day all about? Getting your mother some roses or something. And I looked more closely at it because my own mother, who was an anthropologist, thought that Mother's Day was a very sort of tedious and contrived holiday. And she used to say, I don't ever want you to do anything for me. It's a Hallmark holiday. It's not a real thing. But as I started looking at it, what I found was that there was this woman, Julia Ward Howe, And she worked very closely with another woman called Anna Jarvis back in the 1800s, who had seen the devastation of the Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War, and they had seen the devastation of that male energy, what it had done to the world. And so their idea of having a Mother's Day was the idea of let's inject this female energy into the world. And in their minds, this was a no-brainer. And of course they would say it and the world would flip and there would be, nice, genuine, kind people, because the men would be able to express their female energy, which is, a frustration for people who are, have to have the male power. I mean, that, to not be able to express the soft side is difficult. And one of the things that Julia Ward Howe said that I just was very moved by was that what mother would send their child into battle to kill another mother's child and take away mother and child, but put that, what one of us would send ourselves or another into a situation to take another's life. And it's
Yeah, it's an anti-war holiday. Yeah.
and so what our thinking is that because as we do yoga, we become more sensitive and we can track these things, we have an advantage. We have the choice to be conscious about how we express ahimsa, how we express vidya and do not express avidya, and that what we need to do is learn how to consciously recognize the physical cues, the embodied cues that tell us when we're off track on those things.
Yeah. And how do we do that?
I don't know, we're asking you.
Yeah. Well, there's always, of course, posture. I'm just thinking of the Satipatthana Sutta, where the first thing you meditate on is the body through the breath. And so the breath is really the first. And so this is the Buddha's teaching. And, you're inhaling long, exhaling long, and you're noticing it. Or sometimes it's short and all of that. And it is profound. And then you're actually seeing, and one thing they emphasize that Yoga Sutra doesn't emphasize is you're seeing the body for what it is. You're seeing that it's just like being in a coroner's lab or on a battlefield where you actually see the intricacies of this beautiful, inexpressibly beautiful body blown to bits or suffering, and which is I had one side thought is that one thing that about the school shootings and all that is the media tends to never really show you the blood, the horror. Even in wars, it's like it's always a lot of media that is manipulative doesn't really show you the horror, the bodies close up, or the people who are still in treatment close up. The tears, it's all. No, we don't want to show you that. We want to show you the flag and the marching soldiers and the joy of the army.
Or the suffering, but like the suffering of those, you'll see the pictures of those who've lost loved ones.
Yeah, but you don't see
but you don't see the.
You don't see what they perhaps got to see, which was
Or you don't see
the
them.
shock of the corpse.
You don't see them in the morning when they wake up the next day
Yeah.
and look in the mirror and their life is forever changed.
Yeah.
That
It's so
somehow
sad.
has been left out of what we're shown. And so really, you know, to drop back into your essence that is this, you know, that is accessible, that is this feeling of love and tenderness. That is the first thing, to pause and to really drop into the breath and then to notice, you know, discrepancies or weirdness in your breath, because as yogis we pay attention to breath day in and day out. And when you start noticing, oh, it's not deep, it's not smooth, or it's got some weird thing going on with it, that's a bodily cue
Yeah.
that something is wrong.
Yeah. That it's over here and not over there. And it's like,
Because as you always say, it's like, you know, when the prana gets pulled out of the central channel because you've taken someone out of your heart, or you've had a thought that's done that.
you feel it.
Yeah. And so then you tune in, right? And one of the things that we think is that at that point when you tune in and your thoughts, sensations, emotions, you can kind of assess what's going on in you. You also can then take the opportunity to shift something, to make a subtle shift, like let the breath soften your heart if your heart is hardened, or let, you know, if you notice yourself collapse like Arjuna on the battlefield, not necessarily, you know, saying, oh God, I'm doing that, here I am, a yoga practitioner, and I'm sitting there like this, and not getting mad about that, but coming back to a state of equanimity, consciously choosing to do that.
So tuning in is being mindful. And as always, it's not like you correct it because you're good. It's just like you really see you feel the misery of it, and then you naturally will then start to, you know, the correction
to correct it.
Otherwise it never really gets corrected.
And if you don't do that step, if you just tune in and then start to look at the meta perspective or the context of stuff, you can't really as deeply tune into what else is going on around you.
Yeah.
So it really is important to be able to shift and come back into equanimity through the breath and into this state of open-heartedness through the breath, so that you can then listen more clearly and be more, see the meta perspective on things, so that you can then figure out what action can be taken.
Yeah.
And then once you figure out what action can be taken, you have to, as we always say, experiment, because you may have an idea of what action would be good, or you may not want to do anything. And then you notice what happens if you just sit by the sidelines. Who was it who was saying, if you see violence and you don't act?
Was it Desmond Tutu?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you see action or violence and you don't take some action of some sort, then that in and of itself is violence. And so it really is time in this world that we, in whatever little teeny ways we can, that we take actions. And if there are bigger things we can do, that we do that too. But even if there are small ways we perpetuate peacefulness, they add up. and they start to sensitize not only ourselves but others, that desensitization.
Yeah.
So telling the truth and not accepting the idea of, oh, we now have disinformation. Good, let's have disinformation and information, rather than that saying, no, we want the truth. We want the truth here.
Yeah. And so, like, small, and this is, I think, an important thing in the yamas and niyamas, and is that sometimes all you can do, like, besides save, I'm going to save the whole universe, like in mythology, people today, just saving the planet Earth would be nice, but then, the mythologists take it on, I'm going to save the galaxy, and then all the galaxies. But sometimes you got to do like little teeny things. And this is where, sometimes it really is most potent, like even just like helping someone. Like you always say, like helping someone at the store, holding the door for them, or saying something nice, or, even in helping, a little animal or something. And these things then open you up, and you do more and more little teeny things. And occasionally you can do something that then has resonates more globally, or, to other people, that wakes others up. But sometimes we think, oh, we misunderstand the situation, and we think, well, there's nothing I can do because I'm just one little person, in this one little place. And so because there's nothing I can do, I'm just going to be, I just won't do anything.
Or you can feel overwhelmed, burned
Yeah, you
out.
feel overwhelmed. Yeah.
And so the tiny acts can shift both of those. That that when you do something good or nice, it actually feels good. It's that opposite of wanting to blow up the NRA conference. That when you realize, oh, I feel good in my heart, that starts to make you want to feel that feeling again. And then you're around other people and they feel that from you. You're like, an essential oil infuser where you are feeling happy, and you walk into a room and others don't know why, and it's not they don't even notice you, but they somehow.
Yeah. So it's like, it's the niyama, socha, which everyone says, oh, that's just cleanliness. But actually it means every little part of the world around you, you're just really mindful of and nice to. And so you'll do that. And then from that polishing, I forget the Roshi who says about, you polish your little corner of experience of the universe. You just, and then you get what they call santosha, which is this complete sense of like, there's a sense of satisfaction or joy that then spreads.
Yeah. And that brings to mind this. We were at this Mind and Life conference, and we recommend that if you haven't checked out the Mind and Life organization, that you do. It's a wonderful organization that is the one with neuroscientists who are studying contemplative practices. And we've been involved with them for many years. And at a conference a few years ago, coincidentally, there had been a mass shooting at a synagogue in, I think, Pennsylvania a few weeks before the conference. And the woman who was giving the keynote address said, it turned out that was her synagogue when she was growing up. And so it hit home really deeply to her. And she, as she was saying this address, she said, she was trying to think of, why is it that we live in this culture where we have all kinds of words for lockdown and lockout and all these different things having to do with violence, and why are these violent acts happening and what good is it? Here she is in front of this group of meditators and neuroscientists, and she's saying, what good are these practices doing us? And she was just confounded by that. Am I being just selfish to do these practices in a world that's like this? What is the benefit? And her name is Sona Demijian, and she's a researcher, works with this group that actually works with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so she happened not long after that to be, or before that, to be at a meeting with His Holiness. And so she said, this is what happened. And I was overwhelmed, and I'm wondering what use is any of this anyway? And he said to her, that you do your little corner, you polish your stone, as Richard said, and it may impact 10 people. Mm-hmm. And then it polish their stones. And then all 10 of those people, they impact 10 people. And so on. And that's really how it works. That's really how it works.
Yeah.
And we really recommend that you kind of think about what's at stake for all of us if we don't, as individuals, just say, okay, yes, I've taken this vow of ahimsa, but I'm also going to make a pledge to live that. It's like the Bodhisattva vow in a way, to really, truly bring peace into this world, even if it seems like the world is in disaster. And even if, just for 2 minutes a day, you start focusing in on, well, what does it feel like when I'm feeling upset? And what does it feel like? What's the difference when I'm feeling centered and embodied? And then cultivate the good feelings, because that's watering the seeds of peace within yourself, because they do grow that way.
Even right now.
Even right now. So it's not going to stop these acts of violence today. But I think, we have a few years left in us too, and then many of you will outlive us. And we, if we don't do this together, who's going to do it? Here, it was back in the 1800s when, when Julia Ward Howe was saying, let's do this. That's, 1860. Who's going to do it if we don't do it? Mm-hmm. So.
Some yoga practice.
Yoga practice. It makes you able to do it, I think. And the Sangha, the community, those of you who are here with us, who come to these talks, who, then go teach other people, who do your work in the world, it makes a huge difference. And we have to keep at it.
Shall we open it up?
Yeah, do you want to chant and then we can open it for questions?
What chant do you think? There's Sahanavavatu, which is, I like that one.
I know you do.
Because it's, 1 second. Om Sahanavavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavid Vishavahai Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you. So please keep practicing.